everybody and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, you're really welcome. I'm Jane and my husband Mike is behind the camera. We're British, early retirees, debt and mortgage free and living a thrifty, frugal and money saving life on a super tight budget here in Brittany in northwest France. And every Wednesday we open our home and say come on in and let's have a midweek money chat. Let's take a look at a very difficult chat we all need to have this week. Well, here we go. Every single financial problem that I've had in the past has been of my own making and of my own choosing. And for many people out there, obviously not everybody, that's the same. So that's the topic of our conversation this week, and it's not going to be easy. And the last one is a stinger. So let's get going. We all know that across many countries, there is a huge percentage of the population who have no savings at all. We're not talking about people living in desperate poverty. We're talking about people who have decent incomes here and they still have no savings at all. And we know that we were those people. We were the people who didn't pay ourselves first. And when I say pay ourselves first, it means that's the first line on the budget, the amount of money that you put into savings first every single month. So it's a huge mistake that people make. We know that people make these mistakes. So let's think about it. We don't want to be that person. We don't want to be the person who doesn't save first. You all know I'm British, so you'll know that's where I grew up, and it was a whole culture, a whole mass of society that was comfortable with debt. Whatever you wanted, it was advertised and you could buy it. You could pay for an X amount per month. Kitchens would be advertised on the TV with the amount that you could pay per month. Absolutely everything, the car, the amount paid per month. So it was culturally acceptable that everybody would just get cozy and comfortable with debt. And it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake to rely on debt, because if you're relying on debt, you're not focusing on saving your own money. You're not saving on your own budgeting to save. So it's a huge mistake to be comfortable with debt. Be different. Do not be that person. Do not be the person who's just following everybody else down the debt trail. Don't do that. Be uncomfortable with debt. Be the person who says, I'm not going to do this. So don't be comfortable with debt. It's not a good thing. And it's a huge mistake that people make. And they make it to the point that people aren't even seeing it as a mistake. So don't be comfortable with debt. I've already mentioned, haven't I, that in many modern countries where people have good incomes, not those living in poverty, I've already mentioned that, but those who have decent incomes and have no savings. So we know that's a massive mistake, and it's a common mistake because it's common behaviour. But a really big mistake is to have no emergency fund. It's crazy. And then it gets to my second point of people being comfortable with debt. People treat a credit card like it's an emergency fund. It's crazy. It's a crazy way to think. So don't be that person. Don't be the person who doesn't have an emergency fund. And we think to yourselves, well, how did we get there? Mike and I got our emergency fund together when we first needed one by selling off anything and everything that we didn't need, we didn't use, or we didn't want. And it just gave us a few £100 to get started. And then we just got our emergency fund together by going Spartan, by literally going bare bones budget. And don't forget, I'm talking here about people who were working, and we were both working. So we could go without things. We could save every penny we had to get that emergency fund together. But so many people still do not have an emergency fund. We talk about having $1,000, €1,000 or £1,000 as your most basic amounts. And then when you've got that, working on a month's living expenses or 2 months' living expenses. And the best place to be would be 3 to 6 months. And then when you've got there working on having 12 months living expenses put away, and yes, that is a chunk of money. But what if one of you died? What if one of you lost your job? What if one of you had a terrible accident and you needed to recover? You have to have that money put aside. As talking to a family member, what if one of your pets needed an operation? You need that money. Not all insurance covers absolutely everything. So don't be that person. Don't be the person like everybody else who doesn't have an emergency fund. And also, don't be the person who doesn't have a bit of a stockpile. Who doesn't have a bit of a stockpile in this modern world? Who? We all need to have a little bit more, a few more toiletries. We need to have some more spare toilet paper. We need to have some spare food, spare dog food. If you've got kids growing up, I'm sure if you've got kids and you've got any sense, you will be looking for the next size up in clothes. Not 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 4 years bigger, because your children might have a real spurt of growth. But putting stuff away and having a stockpile. So it's important to have a financial stockpile, and it's really important to have a real stockpile as well of things that we need. Another huge mistake, and this is sadly more common than we all realise, is people not knowing their entire household expenses and incomes and budgets. This can often occur when we've got one person earning, the other person earning, everything being kept separate, and people behaving like they're flatmates or roommates and not actually a family unit. And it is their choice, and I'm not here to criticise, I'm just saying this happens. And then you have, well, I don't know what she's paying for, or I don't know what she's paying for, I don't know what he's paying for, I don't know what he or she has got in savings, I know what I've got, but I don't know what they're doing. And then I know what I budget for, but I don't know what they are budgeting for. And it's a real problem, and it's a massive financial mistake when people don't come together and find their strength in their unity, because that's when you budget together, you have your strength in your unity. And so often people say, well, I've got a budget, but I start asking them questions. I say things to them like, do you eat out? Oh yeah, we eat out. And I ask them this, what is your annual budget for eating out? Well, and they don't know. And I'd say, well, have you got children? What is your annual budget for school expenses? What is your annual budget for gifts? What is your annual budget for clothing? And so often people don't know. And then people say, well, I've got a budget, but I always go over it. Well, what was the point of writing a budget if you always go over it? So you've got an inaccurate budget. So there we go. And I knew this was going to be a tough conversation today. And I'm going to be honest with you and say, just about everything I share with you today are things that we've got wrong in the past and we're getting better at now. But these are really, really common things, and these are massive financial problems. And like I'm saying to everybody, don't be that person. Don't be the person who doesn't have a budget. Don't be that family who do not get your finances together and budget together. Don't be that married couple who don't know what the other person earns or what the other person spends. At least trust each other. Still keep your money separate if that's what works for you, but think of it as a household budget. You might say, well, I pay for this and you pay for that. That's fine, and I always say this, each to their own. But don't live in the darkness of not knowing where the money is or where the money's going. That's what a budget is about. It's a forward plan where you know where the money's going to go, where the savings are going to go. At least get on with conversation and talk to each other about it. So, don't be those people. I now want to have the tricky conversation with everybody about hobbies and expensive hobbies. Because here's the thing. There is the hobby And then there's the buying things for the hobby, which seems to be two separate hobbies. As you may or may not know, I am a quilter. So I'm part of that sort of worldwide online quilting community. And some of the very, very common things that I see is where people will have a room that will look like the stock room of the Missouri Star Quilt Company, and it will have shelf after shelf after shelf after room after wall of beautifully arranged stuff for quilting. And I always like to ask this question because I'm a bit of a nosy person, and I always ask them this: oh, brilliant! How many quilts do you make a year? And they'll say, well, maybe one or two. And then they have all of this stuff to make quilts for the rest of their lives. And then there'll be people who have things like motorbikes, or they have a barn full of cars they're restoring, or they have rooms full of equipment, or rooms full of stuff that they've been collecting but never take out of the box. I always find that really sad, actually. But anyway, they never touch this stuff and it's just kept there. And then they buy more and they buy more and they buy more. The people who've got 4 sewing machines but they only use one at a time. The people who've got 3, 5, 6, 10 cameras or motorbikes but they only use one at a time. Or then when you speak to people who have got all of this stuff that they keep buying and buying and buying and buying, and they never use any of it. So there you go. It's quite common these days, isn't it, that people spend a massive amount of money on hobbies. I'm not saying don't do hobbies. Not saying that at all. Do the hobby. Do the hobby. Stop spending the money on the hobby and do the hobby. Enjoy your time. But it's a problem, isn't it? Don't be that person who spends all of that money on stuff to do the hobby and then you don't do it. Don't be that person. I feel with the next thing I'm going to say, I should probably be wearing protective clothing here because this is not going to be popular at all. And okay, like we put on the screen, it's not preparing for retirement. When do you start preparing for retirement? Well, the thinking person starts preparing for retirement at birth. So their parents are telling them all the way through, get a good job, get a good career, save all your money, and you're going to retire one day. And it's a real tricky one. And I'm going to speak to you women of the 1950s here now. So you women born in the 1950s, you blazed the trail that I followed after you. You were the last of the women who went through school, who came out the other side, and even if you stood shoulder to shoulder with a man stood next to you, he was legally allowed to be paid more than you for doing the same job. I'm the women who came after you where that had changed. Thank you to those women for the fight that you fought on my behalf. So all of you women who came before me and the people who came before me, it was a different world. And those people in their 60s and in their 70s who came from that different world, it's really hard for you now if you didn't have that preparation for retirement, especially women. You weren't taught from day one, get a career, earn money, get a pension, and it's really difficult. But my generation, we were taught that. We have zero excuse. We have zero excuse. And I know full well that all the jobs I did before I got a job with a pension, that had no pension, that I knew I should have had one. I knew I should have been saving money all the way through. And it was my own willful ignorance, my own bad decisions, that I wasn't for those years saving money, that I wasn't for those years making my preparations for retirement. I did say I needed protective clothing here, didn't I? But most of us now, we all know full well, and anyone younger than me, you know full well, you have to make those arrangements yourself for your own retirement. we all know full well that we cannot work forever. Yes, we've all seen that, haven't we? The very few people, and we see them, they're in their 80s and they're in their 90s and they're sprightly and they're fit and they're healthy and they're still doing a job they like. But that's the minority. You're all going to age. You're all going to slow down to a degree. We are all going to be in the position where we are going to have to do less, even if it's just work part-time. But it's a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake if people are making it right now, if they're young and they're fit and they're healthy and they're choosing it. And I'm going to give some examples. I stopped working in my main job in the UK in 2018. And in all the time I was working, I saw young professionals with a decent salary opting out of the pension scheme because they thought they were saving money. I didn't see them saving money for anything massive or life-changing. I saw them saving money for very ordinary things. I didn't see them getting second jobs. I didn't see these people with highly educated, talented people who could earn more money. I didn't see that. I saw them making a very, very bad financial decision to opt out of the workplace pension. And Mike worked somewhere with a workplace pension and he saw people opt out of it too and thinking that they were saving money and actually not putting money aside for your pension. And it's more common than we think. It is, and it does happen. And it's a big, bad financial mistake. I've made that big, bad financial mistake in the past. Don't be that person. And I would say to anybody out there who's not making preparations for your retirement is do whatever it takes to make financial preparations for your retirement, because it's going to happen one day. As part of my final point, I need to explain to you where I've come from to share this viewpoint with you. So I left primary school in 1977 and went off to what you would call high school. And in 1979, a force to be reckoned with came into British society, and that force was Margaret Thatcher. And Thatcherism completely changed the UK. And Thatcherism brought with it Reaganomics, and that was all about free market economies. Let the economy and the markets do whatever they want to do. And what we saw in the UK was the dripping and the erosion of every part of the social safety net that had been built up since the Second World War. And then 1979 happened, and from that point and onwards after that, what we saw was the stripping back of education, the stripping back of higher education, the stripping back of student grants. You couldn't go to university unless you borrowed money, unless you paid for it. We saw NHS dentistry disappear, NHS opticians disappear. We saw things like council-run care homes for children disappear. They put all out to the free market economy on foster carers, and off it all went. We saw the closing down of old people's homes run by not-for-profit councils that all went out there, and it all turned into profit making. So we saw everything from foster care to eyes to dentists to the care of old people. All of those in the free market economy became money-making opportunities, and off it all went. And millionaires and billionaires were made on the back of all of that. So that's what I saw growing up. And that has continued and continued and continued and continued. So things like price controls all went. There used to be price controls here in France on things like food and bread, and it's all going. So what we saw growing up all of the time was financially, you made it on your own or you didn't make it at all. You didn't make it at all. So there are still people years and years and years later who are not taking it upon themselves to learn about money, to learn about finances. And I know people are going to say schools need to teach absolutely everything, and they can't. It's a changing world. If I look back at everything that I learned in school, that world that they prepared me for then doesn't exist now. What I'm saying is that it's upon all of us to be financially responsible for ourselves. And that means we all have to learn about pensions ourselves. We have to learn about budgeting ourselves. We have to learn about mortgages and savings ourselves. We have to learn about taxation ourselves. We can't be passive about this. And people are passive about it. And we live in a world that is rapidly changing. And we can see that in society, can't we? We can see that in countries like America and the UK and here right across Europe with the death of the middle class. We are seeing people who either have a lot of money or not enough money. And we can absolutely see that at the moment, aren't we? Can't we? We can see that with people choosing between heating and eating. So now more than ever, it is so important that we are responsible for our own financial education. We can no longer choose willful ignorance. And Mike and I were discussing that as young people, we were absolutely willfully ignorant. We didn't take it upon ourselves to learn about these things. And it wasn't anybody else's fault but our own. So don't be the person who doesn't financially educate yourself. Do not be the person who doesn't learn about pensions and mortgages and savings and investments and tax-free savings like ISAs and anything like that you have in any country that you live in. Do not be the person sitting there in willful ignorance, because we live in a society that if we're not looking after ourselves, nobody's going to do it for us. Let's go right back to the beginning then. Every single financial mistake I've ever made in my lifetime, it's been of my own doing, it's been my own responsibility, and it's been of my own choosing. Now, I can't turn back time, but I can choose now not to make those mistakes again. And those mistakes that I've shared with you today, so many people make them. They are really common. And none of us should beat ourselves up over this, but we can make good decisions from here onwards. Now, as ever, we want to say thank you to everybody who watches our video. Thank you to everyone who hits that like button, and to all subscribers, old and new. Thank you so much to every single one of you. We love all of your comments and we read every single one of them. So here's a chance for you to join in. What really big financial mistakes do you see are very common in whatever country that you may live in, that people are making them all around you? Just leaves me to say, on behalf of Mike and me, we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.